Should it be easier to prosecute police who are involved in fatal shootings? Or will a new law cause officers to hesitate in dangerous situations, putting lives at risk?
As a law enforcement officer, we're making split-second decisions.
He needed help, and he didn't get help. He got killed.
Supporters of I-940 want more police accountability when deadly force is used. The initiative would also require officers to provide first aid and receive de-escalation and mental health training.
The bottom line is we already get this training.
Both sides weigh in.
Whatever training that's going on has not been effective.
Policing the police, next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. Supporters of I-940 and law enforcement celebrated what they called a historic agreement a few months ago by establishing new standards for police accountability when officers use deadly force. But a divided state Supreme Court ruled this summer that legislators violated the state constitution by changing the language of the original initiative. So, I-940 is now on your November ballot. The battle over this measure is complicated. A yes or no vote sets the stage for a continued fight over police reform in Olympia, with victims' advocates and law enforcement, once united, now on opposite sides.
I always told him to tell everybody he was an Afro-Swede.
Annalisa Thomas and her husband Fred are surrounded by old photos of their son Leonard in happier times. But the tragic events that ended his life at age 30 are the memories that will never fade away.
My son was in a crisis, and he needed help, and he didn't get help. He got killed.
May 23rd, 2013. Annalisa says Leonard had been drinking following the death of a good friend and was at his home in Fife with his 4-year-old son, Elijah. After arguing with Leonard about taking Elijah back to her home, Annalisa called the police.
My expectation was like they would come and they would go knock on the door and they would say, okay, Mr. Thomas, you've had a little to drink. Let's let Grandma take the little boy home and you get some sleep.
Instead, a SWAT team was called in, and Annalisa says Leonard, unarmed, came outside with his son and an overnight bag.
Elijah's kind of standing in front of him, and then there was this loud explosion. And they had blown up the back door. And in that explosion, Leonard jumped off the porch to get Elijah, and he was shot.
A civil court ruled in favor of Leonard's family, with a $15 million jury verdict against the Lakewood police officers in charge of the SWAT operation. But for Annalisa, this story is far from over.
It's been 5 years, and what astounds me is what happened to my son is not an isolated thing.
That's why Annalisa is supporting I-940, an initiative that would improve police training and make it easier to prosecute officers in deadly force cases. A recent study by the Seattle Times shows between 2005 and 2014, 213 people were killed by police in our state, but only one officer was criminally charged.
I think it's crucial that we take some steps toward change so that this stops happening.
But police and victims advocates did take a step toward change in March of 2018, as the legislature adopted I-940, then amended it with House Bill 3003, a compromise measure agreed upon by 940's authors and law enforcement.
They adopted it as written, and then they changed it and refused to let the people vote on their change. You're not allowed to do that.
Professional initiative writer Tim Eyman sued the legislature and won, forcing the original version of 940 on the ballot and putting Annalisa Thomas in a frustrating position.
I was disappointed that it didn't happen. I want to see change.
So Annalisa is now posting flyers on her car and adding her voice to a campaign that's raised $1.8 million as of late September for a yes vote on I-940.
If this doesn't pass, we don't have the tools in place to help people in crisis.
Law enforcement wants to be part of the solution.
Sergeant Courtney Stewart of the Washington State Patrol says the original initiative and the brokered deal in the legislature put officers in a difficult spot too.
I know it can be confusing, and the law enforcement has come on both sides of the issue.
Stewart says the original form of 940 has many problems, including how new officer training would be paid for statewide, and how, when, and to whom officers should render first aid after a shooting situation.
We have several concerns about the bill.
Stewart also doesn't like I-940's new legal standards for officers in fatal shootings. A change she says might make cops think twice about using deadly force when it's most needed.
If an officer would hesitate, they or the people they are trying to protect could get hurt or ultimately lose their life because of that hesitation.
Stewart says police are united with victim advocates in calling for the best training possible to avoid fatal shootings.
Because one deadly confrontation is one too many. I want to be provided the training that is going to make sure that doesn't happen.
But she says I-940 is too blunt of an instrument for the delicate work of police reform.
We don't want to be forced into an initiative that we didn't have any say into.
Plus, if the measure passes, it's a 2-year waiting period before the legislature can change it. That can't happen any earlier unless 2/3 of our state lawmakers agree.
That's a huge concern for us, that if it is passed, we are going to be mandated for the next 2 years to adhere to that unless there is a supermajority to change it. That's very unlikely.
The No on 940 campaign has raised $112,000 as of the end of September, mostly from the Seattle Police Officers Guild. But for Annalisa Thomas, a no vote would be a step back for our entire state.
Because it would send the message that status quo is okay.
Yet officers say rejecting the measure is the most effective way to bring two divided sides back to the table.
We'd love to be in collaboration with everyone and come to a solution together.
And joining us to discuss this very important matter further, we have with us Andre Taylor. He is the founder and executive director of Not This Time, also co-chair of De-Escalate Washington, and brother of Shay Taylor, who was killed by Seattle police in 2016. He's on the yes side of 940. Andre, good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
We also have with us Mike Solan. He is president of Compass, the Council of Metropolitan Police and Sheriffs, speaking against I-940. Mike, good to have you too.
Happy to be here.
We had a coin flip before the show, and Mike, you're speaking first. Why do you oppose this measure?
Well, first I want to thank you, Brian, and thank the Seattle Channel for allowing me to express our concern regarding the issues on 940. Andre, I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And engaging in this debate. I think it's this is a dynamic debate. It's controversial. It cuts deep into emotional human concerns regarding law enforcement and interactions with the public. We feel as if I-940 is detrimental to community safety, let alone public safety officers that serve this great state. Law enforcement in general is a very difficult employment. We differ greatly from other professions across the United States and in the world. We feel as if I-940 will affect errors where officers accidentally shoot an innocent person due to a confluence of dynamic circumstances. And what I mean by that is you have to take in the totality of circumstances with every incident that you see with police shootings. It's dynamic, it is quick, it is split second. The problem is 940 would put the safety and the safety of law enforcement officers in the state at grave risk. It would cause law enforcement to hesitate in the examples I just provided as far as making split-second decisions.
Yeah.
And I want to portray the human side of me as far as I know how difficult it is for Andre in this process and the loss of his brother. I cannot sit here and walk in his shoes with that experience. I've never lost a loved one to violence. And I want to portray to Andre that I'm here to try to find solutions, but explain in context how detrimental 940 is to the public and how it was based on false pretenses under the guise that this involves training, which is not. It is clearly there to make it easier to politically prosecute police officers with these emotional examples that you showed earlier.
Okay, and we'll break down some of those issues. Thanks for bringing that up, Mike. Andre, your thoughts here. Why do you support 940?
940 did something extraordinarily beautiful. Is it brought white, black, brown people together. Natives, black, Latinos. It brought people together. 940 is a grassroots movement. It didn't come from the top down. It came from the bottom up, where people saw what was going on and have seen some tragic incidences that have been going on in the country. Mm-hmm. And the beautiful thing about Washington State is that we have led on a lot of things before. A lot of things happen here before they go around the country. Yeah. And we have the fortitude in this state, the people, the genius in this state to bring forth change and to lead in this country. 940 galvanized the largest people of color movement in the history of this state. We had 700 volunteers. Mm-hmm. We raised $1.8 million. Yeah. We went to the people, and the people decided, along with 940, that it was time to shift things and change things. There's been a lot of discussions in our country about these issues. Nothing has happened anywhere. 940 is the foundation of that change, right? There's a lot of laws on the book right now that could be better. Mm-hmm. 940 is the foundation of change. After change happens, iterations could happen after that. Okay. But without 940, there is no iteration.
And I want to break that down, just some of the context and history we're talking about here, because you were on the set with me just a few months ago. We were talking about how several law enforcement groups and victims advocates had come together over House Bill 3003. That was that compromise measure the legislature worked on with police and writers of 940. The state Supreme Court said no to that, so 940 has to go to the voters, and here we are. You're in a position right now of supporting a bill that De-Escalate Washington was arguing just a few months ago. We don't want this on the November ballot. Help me out with that. How does that context affect your message?
I think that's inaccurate.
Okay.
From the beginning, when 940 was instituted and created, we were always prepared for the ballot. Yeah. We always felt like the legislators would not get involved. Yeah. It was smart for them to see the support of the community, the support of voters around the country, and that probably gave them the fortitude or the wherewithal to want to get involved after the support, right? So they tried to do what they can do. It did not happen. But from day one, we have not been distracted from going to the ballot. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for bringing that up. And Mike, I'll bring in here too, because I think police, there's an interesting dynamic here too, because I know when House Bill 3003 was happening, the Fraternal Order of Police, Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs were on board with that. They said, let's figure out some sort of compromise here. That deal fell through, and we're in this initiative fight. I know that your group, Compass, was not involved with that. Seattle Police Officers Guild, State Patrol didn't support that deal, but do you think voters might be confused as to where law enforcement stands on this issue?
Well, to correct the record, Compass and the Troopers organization were indeed engaged in those talks at the table in Olympia. Okay. What we ultimately realized is that 3003 was a compromise that made it just as easy to politically prosecute police officers and didn't give us the adequate protections that we would need to properly protect the community and the people in this great state. So what we can support, if we want to talk about compromise language, is sensible reform. Okay. Not reform that calls for the immediate prosecution of a police officer based upon a public opinion that is not informed on the matters that are quickly changing and rapidly developing and making human decisions in blink of an eye.
I'm going to hold on that piece for just a second, and Andre, go down this legislative path a little bit further, because I've heard this concern from other law enforcement officers too. I-940 would be forcing officers into a new way to do their job. They'd be stuck with that basically for 2 years unless the legislature had that 2/3 supermajority. I guess if 940 passes, are you going to be there to push the legislature to make some of these changes, or what happens next?
Yes, we have already sat down with law enforcement, and we have agreed to continue the process of making things better. But let me push back on something.
Okay, please.
There is this idea that somehow that officers in Washington State are superior to officers anywhere else, as if they're so superior that they need this de facto immunity in the law, which is malice. Yes. That no other state in the country has. Yeah. So from the perspective of Officer Sloan is that this will make officers unsafe. Well, I'm not sure how that is so, because is he then saying that officers in every other state around this country are not safe?
Okay.
Because there's no one. We are an outlier. There is no police department, no state that has that language.
Okay.
So for us to be like every other state, so is he saying that law enforcement officers are in danger in other states?
Okay.
It doesn't make any sense to me, right?
Okay.
This is going on everywhere in the country, and it's practically impossible to hold a police officer accountable what the law is in every other state.
Okay, okay. Mike, let's break down this piece, the good faith standard that 940 is talking about here. With this current malice standard in place, it's been shown it's virtually impossible to prosecute officers in shootings criminally in our state. What is your position on 940's good faith standard?
Well, my impression is, just for context here, currently there are 11 officers nationwide that are being prosecuted. So it is not impossible to prosecute police officers.
In our state, though, it's a little different in terms of that malice standard. I think.
Well, I would tend to disagree to that extent. I think that's a de facto immunity is their talking point term. As we saw, there has been a police officer that has been charged in this state under the statute that we're currently working under.
Okay.
When you talk about malice is a state of mind. You can't prove state of mind.
Okay.
The problem is that we don't necessarily need malice.
Okay.
What we're focused on is good faith. We don't hold doctors accountable for killing somebody in the operating table. What we hold them accountable is civil liability.
Okay.
What 940 wants to do, and its initial goal, and it's still its main goal, is to make it easier to politically prosecute police officers.
And I think it's taking out this malice term, which is unique. Ours is the only state that has that in place, and I think what Andre's saying is, let's take that out so we can at least be on a level playing field with other states.
You know, I've
maybe.
actually spoken with the author of our current deadly force language that we're operating under, and to a person, we don't need malice in the deadly force language. We don't. Okay. That's one of the reasons why we met with proponents of 940 in Olympia.
Okay. Sounds like he agrees with the initiative.
Okay, at least part of it with this malice piece. I know there's other pieces too, though.
Well, I mean,
let Mike finish, please.
Well, but let's be clear, though. I mean, what 940 is doing, it's stripping malice and making good faith to a level that is completely unattainable for its protection needed to properly protect the community and the law enforcement that provide public safety in those jurisdictions. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, in any police shooting that we've had, whether it's in this state or across the country, in particular in this state, judges, prosecutors, and even sometimes juries have sat on these investigations and weighed in. And to a person, all the shootings that have occurred since 2005 have been ruled justified.
He's saying that he understands that malice is impossible, and at the other side of that, he's saying something different. So there has to be something consistent. It is consistent that we have a law in place that it is impossible, no matter how bad an officer's behavior is, for us to hold him accountable. Now, Dan Satterberg, I had a conversation with him, and he expressed to me this idea of officers making mistakes.
Yeah, the King County prosecutor, yes.
Right. So I said to Dan, how many times does a killing have to happen until it's something more than a mistake? How many times, right? How many times can you say this is a mistake? These issues are going on all over the country. Washington is stepping forward in leadership saying we have a resolution and solution not only for our state but for the rest of the country. The beautiful thing, like I said from the beginning, is that it pulls people together. Not only does it pull community together, it pulls law enforcement together. Because there are law enforcement officers like Sheriff Mincy Johansson that supports 940. So there are more than just community. There are law enforcement politicians that support 940 in its inception. Because 940 is the foundation of change. Let me explain this to you. Law enforcement officers never proposed change. It was only because the community got together and said we needed change. Right? And because we won the initiative process, we created a space for law enforcement now to come to the table. Had we had not won, they would have never proposed anything because
Okay.
they haven't.
Okay. I thank you for bringing that up. And this malice piece is a very important part of 940. I want to make sure we touch on some other pieces too. Let's talk a little bit, Mike, and I'll go to you on this one. This idea of de-escalation training. I've heard a lot of officers tell me they don't want to use deadly force if they don't have to. One deadly confrontation is too many. So why push back against what I-940 is proposing with regard to better training on mental health crises, things of this
You know what,
nature?
thank you for bringing the training angle
Yeah,
up.
let's do it.
And unfortunately, proponents of 940 have used the training angle as a ruse to influence voters across the state as its main goal. Not accurate whatsoever
How do you
because of the training piece.
Okay.
The training piece is, the bottom line is we already get this training.
Okay. But
If
it's
you-
not required by the state, I think, is what the 940.
Well, in House Bill
Officers say.
5311,
Okay.
crisis intervention training, which the sheriff sits on the panel regarding MID, which is mental illness drug dependency. And I quote, "The training prepares law enforcement and emergency services providers with skill to slow down difficult encounters and
Okay.
de-escalate crisis." This is directly from their website.
Okay.
And this is the training that's offered within King County. King County actually pays the Criminal Justice Training Commission to have King County officers and deputies receive crisis intervention training
Okay.
at the academy. Now, on top of that, the Criminal Justice Training Commission offers a program for crisis intervention training, which
Right.
is mandatory for new hires for
Right.
8 hours,
To get that 8 hours when they
2
start.
hours a
Right.
year for refresher, free to those departments statewide.
Okay.
So this is training that we've already received.
Andre, let me have you respond to that, please.
So there's an idea that some training going on right now. Officers, the majority of their training is to teach how to shoot center mass, right? So if an officer has been on the job for some 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right, and he has 8 hours of de-escalation training in a year or twice a year, and an incident happens, that officer, a person, is predisposed to go back to a behavior that they're comfortable and been trained to do. So if the majority of your training is shooting center mass, that 8 hours of de-escalation training is not going to even come into play. What we are seeing is that they are, my organization represents a lot of families that have experienced police shootings. Billy Langford was an individual who was having a mental health crisis.
Okay.
His girlfriend called law enforcement and told law enforcement he needs to go to a hospital, right? Law enforcement came there. Now, I don't know what kind of training this officer had, but in 4 seconds, they shot Billy Langford, already knowing that he had a mental health crisis. The call was already made. So whatever training that's going on has not been effective. So we want to make sure officers are getting the proper training, knowing how to de-escalate throughout their career, not just 8 hours.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for bringing that up. I would love to try to jump into the first aid requirement in 940 if we can briefly. Mike, I'll start with you. Yes side says this is something that's going to save lives, could be a positive point of contact with the community to resolve conflicts. What do you think about this first aid
The first aid
requirement?
training is another short-sighted part of I-940, which is completely against common sense. So a good example would be if I'm responding to an active shooter situation, wherever it may be, if I-940 is passed, the way the law is written, and I think that's why 940 proponents want to walk away from it, is because I would have to stop trying to apprehend that shooter to render first aid to somebody that needed it.
Okay.
The priority is life, safety, and stopping crime as it is. So can you imagine if I were to stop an active shooter who was shooting dozens of people to save one?
Okay.
That is a hands-on experience, a common sense experience as to why 940 is awful bad for the community in general. And I want to just say one more thing.
Briefly,
as
if you
far
can,
as-
I want
the
Audrey to
crisis
respond to that.
intervention training
Yeah.
within King County.
Okay. Okay.
We get some of the best training. That's why I say we are some of the best trained officers across
Okay.
the state, because I've had the pleasure to travel across the nation
Okay.
and to experience firsthand other officers from different departments. And I can tell you to a person
Okay.
that people in this community are lucky to have the law enforcement they have, providing them public safety.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure you respond to that first aid piece.
Let me explain.
Okay.
Let me respond to this. Real human stories. My brother was killed in 2016 by law enforcement, right? The reason why we specifically put that first aid training in there is because a law enforcement does not have to. There's no law that says the law enforcement officer has to provide first aid.
Yeah.
My brother was shot. He was handcuffed, hands behind his back. He was no threat, and left there to bleed out for 8 minutes, which is why we put.
Okay.
We don't want a situation to come about. God forbid that an officer has shot somebody and there's some type of bias and he says, I don't care, this guy's a criminal, let him die. You know what I mean? That's an extreme case.
Okay.
But this will even prevent that extreme case.
I see.
Right?
Okay.
So there's no law that says that. You would think that there would be a law that says if somebody is lying down bleeding, do some first aid.
Okay.
But there's not that. We want to make sure through 940 that.
Right, I just want to jump on
we
that.
need to start wrapping up
Sure,
the
I
show.
just want to jump on that.
Incorporate this in
One
your
more-
last statement,
I want
please.
to talk about context, and
Okay.
Andre brings up his brother, which is tragic.
Yep.
Like I said earlier, I can't even comprehend that loss.
Okay.
You have to put in context with every use of force, meaning when in that incident, as tragic as it is, there was only a few officers at the scene. I know in firsthand people who have been handcuffed that have actually killed police officers. So every
Okay.
situation is different.
Okay,
People
I
have to understand
that.
the context to this and understand
Fair enough.
why things happen, why we act the way that we do to protect ourselves and protect the public.
Thank you. I need you to wrap up with a 30-second statement in closing, please.
Sure. I just got done talking about context, Brian and Andre, and again, thank you so much. This has been a difficult discussion, and I think it's important for the community to understand that this is something that special interest groups, and it's no disrespect to Andre, it's not demeaning your experience, but special interest groups have taken on this cause where they want to politically prosecute police officers, not only in this state, but across the nation. We're seeing it in California. I can't express enough how detrimental and out of context how bad this is for our society.
Okay.
When you remove protections from people that are here to protect you, to make them feel that they can provide a service to you which gives them some protections as far as doing their job effectively,
Okay.
then we are lost in society.
Thank you very much for that. Andre, you get the last word.
Officer Sloan, out of his own mouth, admitted that malice was impossible. We have a malice law. We want to change it. 940 is based on making sure that that is changed. 940, again, brings people together. It's bigger than my brother. Our country has come through many impasses before where Americans of all backgrounds have stood up and said it's time to change things. We did it with Jim Crow laws. We did it with slavery. We are a great country because of our ability to come together and to change things together.
Okay.
This is another impasse that we can change and be the leaders in the country on police accountability.
Okay.
It is incumbent upon us to do so. The country is depending on us, and I think that citizens of this country will stand up and make sure that change happens.
Thank you both for your input, and we will be right back.